Welcome. This is Generous Theology. In this episode, Chuck and Brock enjoy spending time with Professor Len Goodman's Chapter 33, Happiness, from the Cambridge History of Medieval Philosophy.
Let's check in here. My friend, we have a chance to continue in the vein that has been so profitable for us for the last two sessions. This is Chapter 33 in the Cambridge History of Medieval Philosophy. This is Happiness by Professor Len E. Goodman. And we've had a chance to start with the background, the Aristotelian aspects of things that end up being so relevant to contextualizing further discussion. But now that we're out of that, we have a chance to really consider some actual medieval thinkers here. And one of the first sections in the professor's treatment speaks about some of the aspects of happiness from Judaism's point of view and perspective. And if it's okay, Chuck, to just maybe throw you in to start things off, how did this section hit you, and what were some of the strengths of it, and maybe if there were any areas that, of concern as well? How did this, aspect of the rabbinic tradition sit with your reading?
Yeah, I found this particular section to be well written, getting at some of the key issues. So, for example, Goodman draws a contrast between Saadia Gaon, this systematic Jewish philosopher, who, in talking about happiness, he's talking about this blend of diverse goods, but Saadia understands or claims that in the end, evil outweighs good in the world. And so therefore, he spends a lot of times talking also about suffering and how does one get to happiness in a world, that's filled with suffering, which I think that's a good question to ask. And he does tie it to some teachings of the Old Testament and in the law, the Torah. And then you have Maimonides, who rejects this thesis of Saadia that evils outweigh good in this life. He maintains good is preponderant and makes the argument that our suffering stems from our own acts or omissions. And again, this is an interesting discussion because here we have Jewish folks who, are using at least the Old Testament portion of Scripture to have a discussion that we also see replicated, as we know, often in the Christian world as well. And later we'll talk a little bit about the Christians and Augustine and how he fits into all of this. But there was this same sort of contrast where you've got Saadia, who understands that evil is something that is in the world, and Augustine understands that. And then you got Maimonides, who's, oh yeah, but in the end, we're all good. We all point to good. He seems to have a connection to Aristotle there. But that also fits in the history of Christianity with Pelagius and some of the arguments he makes. So I found it very interesting to see some of the same, and it makes sense too, to see some of the same discussions that we have in Christianity reflected in these Jewish thinkers. And then, of course, much of what the Jewish thinkers, because they are focused on the Old Testament, which of course we see as scripture as well, I think there is good that we can understand out of it. And so, for example, Saadia, and I think Maimonides as well, conceive of happiness in these pluralistic terms. Goodman describes it as a blend of diverse goods. And I think there's something there that Christians can work with as well in this Jewish tradition, and talk a little bit about what does this mean? What does it mean to pursue happiness in this world? Is it going to be focused on just one thing? And there is a tendency, I think, in some of the Greek philosophers to really want to bring the ultimate pursuit down to one thing, just like we have in this idea that we want to explain the world with one overarching theory. A lot of Greek philosophers seem to want to bring the idea of happiness down to one specific thing. And in Jewish thinking, it says, well, that doesn't seem to work so well. And I think that there's a sense in which, as Christians as well, we see that. We understand that there is one thing in the pursuit of happiness. True happiness is in the pursuit of God, but even how we pursue God and how we pursue knowing God and how we pursue emulating God is more than just simply an intellectual pursuit. It's more than simply an emotional pursuit. It's more then it's more than just one thing, but that God is the creator of everything and therefore of a diverse set of creatures and creations and emotions and all that we have within us. It makes sense then, since God created us to be very diverse in many ways, that the way that we even pursue happiness and we pursue that through our pursuit of God, that there is going to be some diversity in that. And then Sadia as well reflects that in some of his situating that fulfillment in this idea of a community. And I think you do see that in the Jewish scriptures in the Old Testament, this importance of the community of Israel, the nation of Israel. It was a community. And I think as Christians, we see that as well in the New Testament, the fellowship of believers and the fellowship the early Christians felt among each other. I think that's just a reflection of what we see in the Old. And so in these various different sort of pieces that we read Goodman writing about in these Jewish thinkers, I think there's a lot there that we can learn from that. So I really appreciated that particular section. How about you? What were some things that maybe struck you as really good in that, or and maybe some things that were concerning as well?
Thank you for that, Chuck. That was a beautiful opening to this section, which frankly I enjoyed reading a lot, like you. I really appreciated Professor Goodman's approach and the way that the content was laid out. And like you, I agree that there's something important in noting that while perhaps it was very common to think in the Greco Roman culture, to think about this idea of the rational man, or homo rationalis, for lack of a better term, this idea of people acting according to this rational template, that ethics are this matrix of virtues, individualistic virtues. I think that was a powerful point. And I don't know that it's fair to say that the entire Greco Roman culture was concerned with the excellence of the individual and minimizing the communal aspects. But at the very least, Professor Goodman shows here that some of the Judaistic thinkers, like you mentioned, Sadia Gaon and Maimonides, thought about ethical excellence, let's say, happiness, which is the title of the chapter, in light of these manifold responses in these multiple domains, this pluralistic aspect of things that you brought out so well. I thought one of the most beautiful responses here had to go about with the response for why was the murder of Abel by his brother Cain, in the view of Jewish thinkers, such a tragedy. And Professor Goodman has a quote here to summarize their thinking that says, "To take one life is to destroy a world." And the answer is that Cain not only killed Abel, but all of the hope that Abel's life would have brought to the world. And so we think here of any of the accomplishments that Abel might have done to advance his world. And we also think of his posterity, his children, his grandchildren, the nations that could have come from that godly man. And so that was a really in-depth and interesting thing to contemplate. And like you mentioned here, Sadia Gaon, the Jewish rabbi, offers something that does seem to be pointed at this rationalistic idea from the Greco-Roman world. And I'm reading a quote here from page 458. "I find some people suppose, indeed are certain, that it is man's duty to order his entire life by a single trait of character. Examining this view, I find it utterly mistaken in several ways. First, if the love of a single thing and preference of it to all else were best for us, the Creator would not have implanted in human nature the love of any other. Secondly, don't you see that even the most elementary actions cannot succeed with just one element? How then can the whole complex? If a builder built a house of stones, or teak, or thatch, or nails alone, it would not do at all, as it would work if he had built it of all of these in combination. Likewise, with cooking and food, drink and dress, service, and all of our other needs, doesn't it open one's eyes to see that none of these specific activities works with just one means? All of them serve our comfort. How much less can the needs of our soul and our character be met by a single object? Now, perhaps it's not fair to charge this idea of being a rational person with this overwhelming oneness. Perhaps the Jewish criticism has taken it too far, and perhaps no Greek thinkers actually thought or expressed it in the way that the rabbi here criticizes. Having said that, it does at least seem to note something, and that is we live in this manifold world, Chuck, this world that is so filled with dimension and depth that it's very difficult to adequately talk about it or do it justice with small or singular concepts. And I think that gives us reason to praise the Creator, that He would create such a complicated and complex world, and yet still give us patterns of belief and behavior that are valuable, that are worthwhile. And so I really liked that first part of the section there. Any other thoughts here on this part of it?